Hi, this is Bill Wade, and I'd like to again thank the ITPA for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about how we're going to operate as we come out of this pandemic. Um, but before that, let me introduce myself because I think that I've only done maybe one other little talk for ITPA. But as you can see from my resume, um, there. It clearly shows a guy that couldn't keep a job, but it also shows somebody who'd worked in public companies, private, family. I've worked with the automotive aftermarket, heavy duty, light duty trucks, farm business, even the railroads. So I think I had a chance to make every possible mistake. And if I had to prove that, I'd say that I no longer have that beard, and I don't think I could fit into that tux. So those were two mistakes that I've already corrected. This is really curious. I look back and I see that in any time of a chaos like this, there are things called plastic hours. Plastic hours are those times when, because of a kind of cosmic shift in what's going on, there is a chance for um, there to be innovation and motion in areas that were previously all tied up and, as we'd say, traditional, um, where there hadn't been a lot of innovation. But now, with all of this movement, those that are smart get a chance to make some changes without the usual stigma that goes with those changes. The plastic hours are rare, and I hope that the crises are rare too. Um, they are entirely leadership dependent. In other words, this is an opportunity you have, but unless you do something to move your organization along, nothing positive can come out of it. So, as we look at how we can use our plastic hour, we have to look at what we have to work with. Number one is human capital. I don't care what organization it is, we have a lot of it built up, and we have to find a way to maintain a good level of that, even though we might be switching our organization around, we might be pulling people in or sending people out, but we have to keep our core together. If you're listening to this, it means your company probably did a good thing in the first bout with COVID and turned as much of inventory and other assets into cash as they could. The government regulations facing us are yet to be determined. I don't know, as I sit here Monday afternoon, who will win the election. But I can tell you that either side, we're still going to have to deal with OSHA and DOT, EPA, and God knows what else they can think up. The idea that things can be brought in as a service is a fairly recent thing, but as you can see here, you could have mobility as a service. That's what a lot of people talk about now. You could have manufacturing as a service, marketing as a service. You could have service as a service. You could have analytics as a service. You could have any number of things, any number of our functions be outsourced and created um, as a module to fit into our business and help us move along. The biggest thing, and I want to get back to this later, to me, is the relationship of the sales function. Some of the best guys and girls in our various companies are out in the field. But guess what? Just last week, a recent survey done by Industrial Distribution, or one of those magazines, tells us that 65% of industrial buyers do not in fact need the return of a sales function that exists like it did before. In other words, they may not have been valuing the sales function as we saw it, and we're going to have to look and see how they really need it. If you see, if this market continues to be as tough as it is now, even though a lot of people are still doing well, I think you're going to see a big shakeout at the bottom. I think there are lots of smaller businesses, that maybe some big businesses, that won't be able to handle this. They'll get scooped up by bigger companies, and before you know it, we'll have the rise of the giants. I'm not quite sure what to say about groups, associations, trade shows, or whatever. Why? Because all of a sudden, now that we can't do them, we find out that maybe we should find some substitute for them in their traditional sense. The utility of trade shows has long been in question. Whether or not we can figure out some substitutes that provide the same kind of funding and a new kind of funding model is really the interesting thing there. When you look at IoT or IoTT or IoTTT, we're looking at the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Trucks, Trailers, and Technology. Whatever, the Internet is going to tie everything together. And what this gives us, along with the analytics tools that are now available to us, is a way to evaluate every single one of our assets, whether it's our organization, our people, our inventory, or our working machines. We can evaluate every single one of them on a different set of criteria that will tell us where our money is best spent. We talk endlessly, I'm sure you hear on the news, about artificial intelligence. Well, look, artificial intelligence is really nothing more than a bunch of algorithms that are fed data, which is picked up by sensors and sent in. It takes a look at it and sorts it out and makes sense out of it so that it can answer our questions. It's artificial intelligence. And as it does it time after time after time, it can bend itself, or what we call become a learning system. You can see right off the bat that the one of the outcomes of all of this is consolidation. We already talked about the possibility that some of our brethren may not have the financial wherewithal to keep going. I think that when you see those get scooped up and put together with some other big guys, and some other big guys getting together with yet third-party big guys, you're going to see definitely the rise of the giants. I think one of the other things that we're going to see is some generational pressure, because there's so many family businesses here. There's a lot of generations, or a lot of people in these newer generations, that may just not want to go through the same kind of things that we went through in good times, much less in bad times. So the opportunity to take a few chips off the table or the pressure to take some chips off the table, I think, will be growing. I also think that we're going to see a lot more non-traditional competitors. Normally, here's where I would talk about the Amazons or Walmarts of the world. But look, even from within our traditional channels, I think we will see people rise up to sell stuff that we haven't thought about before. in order to predict the near future or predict the present, we have to look at what the technology that's available to us is and figure out how it makes sense for us. The number one thing is certainly asset analytics. We've got assets, we've got buildings, we've got machines, we've got people, we got inventory, whatever. But when was the last time we actually put a hard pencil to it to figure out what exactly the payback was on all of those investments? I see with the advent of new materials, especially things like composites, we're going to have to retrain a large part of both our own people and service people in the field because they just don't know how to handle that. They may not know how to handle advanced electronics or even advanced electrics. The new fuels, I'll talk about in a minute, but I believe that that's going to be one of the real driving forces in the change of our equipment in the near term. And of course, I don't have to tell you that recyclability has been legislated over in Europe for, 10 or 15 years, and it is really getting a following here. So, these are just things that we have to kind of throw into our soup pot to make sure that we don't miss anything. When we talk about overall innovation in the heavy truck parts business, it always comes down to basically these same 5 things. We have OEM component integration. Who here doesn't remember being able to buy a 7-inch round headlight for about $20 as opposed to buying a forward corner or whatever they call those things for about $1,200. Design for recyclability, once again, is really forcing the OE's hand in a number of their designs. And the last thing that I've got listed here, the death of diagnose and repair. I think that because of the severe technician shortage that we have right now, estimated somewhere between 70,000 and 200,000 techs, it's only going to get worse as the machines get more complicated. So instead of the way we've done it in the past, which is to diagnose the problem and get in there and repair it by changing out components or rebuilding something, that's going to be, I think, by and large, taken over by remove and replace types of repair. This was going to be such a neat slide because I had all of these disruptive technologies laid out. You can see it doesn't even really fit on this slide, and I'm sorry about that. But when you get your copy of these slides, take a look at all the different things that are being done right now. If we don't figure out what parts of these things we're interested in, it's going to be very hard to catch up if we let this magic plastic hour get away from us. I talked about the fuels before. Clearly, hybrids or electric over diesel is working all day. We call that the locomotive system. But you also see hydrogen now being used 2 different ways. One is a consumable fuel, like the Cummins Westport engine, and the other is hydrogen fuel cells to create electric power for either direct power for components or batteries. You see, I've kind of blurred out ethanol because finally I think people are starting to realize that that may have been the worst idea ever. After all, here we are on a planet with hungry people around taking crops of edible material and changing it into fuel. So we have a shortage of food. we have an excess of fuel. We're taking the food that we are short on and making more different kinds of fuel. It doesn't make any sense, especially not with the rise of synthetics. Synthetics are fuels that are made out of chemicals. The chemicals are derived from all sorts of sources, but not necessarily having anything to do with plants. And of course, DME or dimethyl ether has been in the news for at least a couple of years now. That seems to be a leading design, especially for the cities. Boston Consulting Group looks at all of this stuff and says, this is really going to be big. Thank you so much for the Boston Consulting Group. However, they kind of missed something. If you look up here in the left-hand corner, you'll see those big haul trucks. If you go to any major mine today, you'll see those haul trucks running around that mine with nobody in them, because they can be remotely operated for a fraction of the cost that it takes to have somebody just sit there. When you look at the farms in the Midwest at about this time of the year, that second picture on the left, you may see combines, 4 or 5 combines working as a coordinated unit. Those combines are being driven by satellite positioning. I've actually seen a demonstration of this where they took a combine and ran it for a mile over a field and came out within 6 inches of where they started. So you think about it, we've got the lead combine here, and it's being driven by a satellite, or it's being positioned by a satellite. And then you've got all those other combines that are just slaves. There may or may not be anybody in them, because there's no necessary reason for it. They can all be controlled by the guy in the front cab. So, that not only is going to happen, I think the idea of convoys is for sure going to happen here very shortly. When we talk about technology, one of the things that's often left out is the technology of distribution. Good God, when you look at Amazon with 1 million people working in one thing, and that's distribution, it really boggles the mind. So what do we see in the future of just that technology? Well, you've got things like additive manufacturing, also called 3D manufacturing, or 3D printing. One of the big drawbacks has always been, well, we can't do that because we have so many different materials that we'll never be able to get it done. 6 months ago in Atlanta, they were able to 3D print a human throat with obviously human cells. So don't tell me that materials are going to be the hang-up. I think when you look at the free flow of communications, I'm really talking both about communications between the tractor and trailer and the communications between that setup as a unit and some kind of control space. Years ago, a bunch of bearing companies got together and decided that they weren't doing logistics correctly, even though they were all competitors. So they got together and founded something called Colinx, in which they were able to take millions of dollars out of the function of physical distribution of their product, because they reasoned that the products were pretty much the same in terms of handling, and they were going to pretty much the same customers. When you think about it, that would be an interesting twist on the thing that is constantly talked about, which is manufacturers going direct. And of course, analytics in the distribution space, I think, is absolutely essential now, because a good analytics program can easily take 50% of the stock out of a supply chain, 50%. And that, of course, just turns into cash. The technology is developed all over the place. It's developed by little guys, big guys. It's developed by Amazon, and it's developed by that kid that lives next door in the basement. So the technology can be developed all over the place. Deployment, however, is serial. We've got to wait for us to understand some of the services we have, and then take those services and be able to interpret them for our own business. I don't really expect you to be able to read this slide unless you're right on top of it. But this is just a summary of some of the wireless technologies now available for use in heavy equipment. It's all over the place. It does all kinds of different things. And frankly, I don't really care who does what to whom, except that it needs to be standardized. When you look at things like the ACES and PIES standardization programs that we have for cataloging material, or VMRS, which we have as a standard for keeping track of parts and costs, you realize the power of the idea of standardization. I've been doing this as a consultant for about 15 years now. The four guys that I've listed there on the top in yellow are some of our specialists in the technologies and the applications that we've just talked about. I'm sure you'll recognize some of those names because they've been heavily involved across the industry over the last, I don't know how many years, in terms of figuring out how to match up technology and the various forces that are pushing or pulling at our customer base. The list in white is a bunch of companies that are our clients and or partners that are doing all kinds of things that many of the people watching this may want to look into. For instance, Uptake is huge in the area of predictive analytics. Every jet that you fly on has some uptake to it because they're monitoring the engines and predicting when the engine might need a little tune-up. I feel better for that myself. We have companies like McKay, who you well know is the Mac Daddy of providers of good market information. Waypoint Analytics is a company that we work with that provides just state-of-the-art analysis of profitability and inventory. And even our friends down at Swift Energy, down in Lafayette, Indiana, it's a bunch of mad scientists working at Purdue and coming up with some of the damnedest synthetic energy solutions you can imagine. So those are our resources. I'd like to say thanks again to Scott and everybody at ITPA for inviting us. If there's something that you saw here that you'd like to work through or talk about, just give me a call. The number's there on the slide, and I can set up a conference call, whatever we need to do to discuss what your concerns are. You can also send me an email, and that's also on that slide. At any rate, thanks again. I think we will get through the virtual world here for the next 12 months But it's really hard to get together later and have a drink. And I'm so sorry for that. So thanks again for listening, and I hope to hear from you.